Okay, guys, today on Nomadic Delights, my guest is Kwaku Dappah. He is a founder and a podcaster and a program manager with a passion for entrepreneurship, writing, and online learning. Okay, Kwaku, welcome to Nomadic Delights, and thank you for joining me today.
Hey, thank you for having me.
No, it's all good, man. I'm lucky to actually, I know you're the busy man, so that for when I got the opportunity, I couldn't actually, pass up on it. So thanks for that.
No worries, appreciate it. Looking forward to chatting a bit more.
Sweet. Well, I got a few questions ready, so I'm happy to hear that. So, first of all, I did a bit of research on you, and let's just say you're the man of many talents. So, this podcast for today will be a discussion about you and your diverse project. Okay. So now, before I start off, I want you to give me a quick introduction to my listeners, and I'm gonna start off saying Kwaku. Am I saying that correctly? First of all.
Yeah, do you know what? I've gone through my life with so many variations of pronunciation. So, the official Ghanaian way you want to pronounce it is Kwaku. But I'm also aware that not everyone has the vocals to produce that type of sound. So, Kwaku is the next best thing. And growing up, they actually used to call me in primary school was Kwaku, secondary school was Kwaku. University was that, so Kwaku's fine. That's like that's like a clean way.
Well, the thing is, for me, it's like those football commentators where they make the full effort to try and pronounce the whole name. Yeah, I try. I mean, because I always believe if someone, it's always good to call someone with the name that their mother gave them. It's a kind of, you build a bond with them. So I try always. I ask, but saying on that topic of Kwaku, what does Kwaku actually mean?
Yeah, do you know what? I get asked this quite a lot, and I feel people expect to get a lot more of an interesting answer. But essentially, in my culture, the Akan culture of Ghana, typically you're given a name based on the day of the week that you're born. So, there's a male and female equivalent for each day of the week. And I was born on a Wednesday, therefore my name is Kwaku. And then the female equivalent of that would be Akuya.
It's interesting because we have similar in the Somali culture, but we don't use it as a name. We just as a nickname. So if someone is born on a Monday, we go as Snino, so which basically means Monday. So but that's more of a nickname. But that's how it is here. Really good to know. I mean, I'm gonna ask you about that, but a bit later on because I have another name I want to ask you. But before we continue, Kwaku, so who is Kwaku Dappah? I mean, I hope I'm saying the surname as well correctly. Please correct me if I ain't.
No, that is fine.
Sweet.
Cool. All right. So who is Kwaku Dappah? It's funny when you get this type of question. It's hard to know which aspects of yourself you want to present. But I guess on a surface level, I'm a guy, 27 years old, from South London, born and raised, of Ghanaian heritage. I've had quite interesting experience in that I've seen in some ways I've seen two I've had two experiences and engagements with different I guess social strata of the UK, in the sense that I kind of come from I'd say lower middle class background, grew up on a council estate in South London, and then at around the age of 14, I moved to more of, I guess, a suburban part of London, and I went to a grammar school, and it allowed me to see how the kind of working class inner city life is for many people from immigrant backgrounds, but then also saw a bit more of the privileged lifestyle of middle class white Britain, and that kind of continued into my educational journey after that as well. So that's kind of me as far as background. But as far as career wise, so as you mentioned earlier, I'm a podcaster. I have a podcast called Over the Bridge, which is a podcast that I started with 4 of my friends from uni. I'm also a program manager for a startup community called YSOS, which starts with Your Startup Your Story, and I am a co-founder alongside my brother of a business called Dapper Chocolates. Yeah, I'm sure that we'll talk a little bit more about that further. But yeah, I'm just a guy with many projects, and yeah, that's me, I guess, in a nutshell.
No, honestly, that's a great introduction, because it kind of, how do they say, give us a nice, short summary from where you grew up to where you're at right now, and starting on that topic of growing up in education, grammar school. One funny thing, because before I moved to the UK, it wasn't that fussed about such thing as grammar school. Living in Manchester, I saw people desperate, like people would actually move whole addresses. They would actually rent a house just to get within the kind of boundary of that school. So what's the big hype with grammar school? I mean, I know it made a change for your perspective, but was it a blessing or a curse for you?
That's a good question. I think one thing that makes grammar schools so attractive to people is that you can get a quality education, what's perceived as a quality education, whilst not having to pay the bill that would come with attending a private school. So for many people, it's like a middle way between going to a state comprehensive and going to a private school. So I think that's what motivated my parents initially. Funnily enough, my parents didn't read much about grammar schools until a family friend had got his son into one, and then encouraged my dad to try to get my brother to apply. And once he got in, it's kind of became a thing where, okay, let me get the rest of my kids into a grammar school. And he was successful in that mission. So well done to him. I feel like that was one of what he classes as one of his successes in life, was to support his children into getting a good education. So yeah, I guess with grammar schools, for me personally, I'd say overall it was a good experience. I feel like, I mean, when I was in primary school, I was part of like Gifted and Talented. I guess I flourished education wise for a large majority of my life. So going to a grammar school, it allowed me to maintain, or at least be surrounded with people with similar academic ability in an environment in which that is actively encouraged to like succeed educationally as much as you can. So in that sense, it was beneficial. But then on another side of things, again, being from a area in which, I guess in a straightforward way, I hadn't really interacted with many white people growing up. In my primary school, I had, and this is no exaggeration, I grew up in Peckham, so my primary school was easily like 70% Nigerian. I'd say like even 80 to 90% black, and then 70% of that Nigerian. And Peckham is kind of referred to as Little Lagos, so
Niger for life.
Literally, so that was very representative in my school. And coming from that into an institution in which I'd say it was easily 60-70% white, and a big proportion of that middle class, there was a introduction to a class and race that I didn't have much interaction with, which required a bit of adjustment, I should say.
Yeah.
So for me going there, I was like, wow, I went on an open day after my brother, in fact, prior to me actually getting in, there was an open day, and I looked around the buildings and I was like, wow, this is like Harry Potter. There was like pictures of head boys dating back to like the 1920s. There was like loads of wood, and like there was like in the main hall, there's a I don't know what you'd call it, but there was like on the wall, there were engraved in gold leaf all of the students that had gone on to Oxford and Cambridge, and a lot of the high achievers in sports and all these different things. So it was to me, it was like, wow, this is a different world. So it was nice to be able to like seeing that kind of lifestyle, but in being in that space and being someone that is visibly different and visibly stands out, it meant that it led to situations in which myself and my friends were grouped in a certain way and viewed in a certain way. And with that, we noticed that there was a difference in treatment and perceptions of us based on what I'd say was race and class. So that was a negative side of things. But when you have your group of friends and that's what you used to, that type of treatment, you don't really see it as that crazy. But it's only looking retrospectively as an adult, I was like, oh wow, like that was a bit strange. So yeah.
You know what? You've actually hit the nail on the head with the element. I mean, first of all, it's good you got to see a different world, because I always believe, we're all one race, human race, and at the end of the day, everyone's goals and ambition should be the same. So like you said, you've come in, you've seen what, as a gifted young black male, well, what I can achieve, why should I have a limit? That's good. But at the same time, like you said, just because you look different from most of the other people, it shouldn't mean you should be treated differently. So it's like you said, looking back, we kind of, we may have accepted it, but then we start thinking, actually, that question was a bit funny, or that treatment was a bit, so it's good. But did it, I mean, besides, and now, because I'm going to come to the next point, because I did some research on you, and I know that, like you said, with your grammar school, a lot of the high achievers went to Oxford and Cambridge, and I know you went to Cambridge, but the question I have is that if you had a son today and you had the opportunity to go to that grammar school, I know UK has changed since when you first grew up, would you do the same, give your son the same experience? Or daughter, sorry, just to clarify, boy or girls?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I haven't given it too much thought, but kind of thinking off the cuff, I do feel like, I mean, there's a lot of people politically, I guess left-leaning in particular, that want to abolish grammar schools.
Right.
And I'm not necessarily of that thought. I do feel like there's a lot of benefit to particularly working class people, where they are able to, as I said previously, access a certain level of education and expectation, I think, more importantly, that molds you to want to achieve as much as you can. And is a way in which it gives access to social mobility, at least from an earlier part of your life. And I think if you get rid of those, it would be, unless there's a large investment in comprehensive schools in which the level of education there matches what a grammar school would be, and then you're able to, everyone's essentially getting equal access to high quality education. Unless that is provided, I think it would be detrimental to a lot of people that do want to. And that's not to say that if you go to a comprehensive school, you won't be successful. Like that's clearly, there's so many successful people in all areas of life all areas of careers that have been have come from a comprehensive school and ended up being successful. So that's not to take away from that, but I feel going to a grammar school definitely gives you an advantage in some ways. So me personally, I think I probably would. I probably would. To be honest, I'll just leave it there. I think I probably would, because it's not something that I'd shy away from.
No, because one thing I 100% agree with you. If we had good quality education, and like you said, remove this whole element of, elitism or social, class, then, because I recall living out in Belgium for a few years when I was contemplating taking my kids, first of all, to school, and I was given two options. They go, look, Mohammed, you can either take them to normal public school, and I'm used to public school in the UK, or you can take them to private school. And then when I found out the price of private school, I said, unless they teach my kids how to fly, I'm not going to pay that kind of fees. Okay. So basically, but one thing that I did find out, which was impressive, in Belgium, and even the royal family kids went to normal school. That's how good the education system was.
Okay.
So like you said, if in the UK, at the state school was given the same kind of support, then people would not be too fussed, as long as kids had a good education and they can move on. But however, the way life is, you're right. It's probably better if you have the opportunity just to simply give your child the best kind of options in the world. And I mean, unfortunately, I won't go too deep into politics. You still have people who come out of special schools and they still not are great people. Yeah. So and how would you say? And yeah, I had to bite my tongue. Okay, I'm gonna continue. Yeah. Sorry. And okay, back to Kwaku. So you finished grammar school. You went to Cambridge University. Yeah. Now, what was the choice of Cambridge? I mean, I know the high achievers in the school, but I mean, first of all, on my side, respect. It's the top 2 universities in the UK, worldwide known. So well done for that, for getting that. What I need to understand, why did Kwaku choose to go there?
So to be honest, when I had applied, I didn't actually. It was quite some reluctancy in actually applying in the first place. If it wasn't for my dad prompting me to do so, I probably would not have applied. And I think that's for a couple of reasons. I feel like Cambridge hasn't done well PR wise to give the impression that it's open to people from a vast array of backgrounds, right?
Yep.
When you think about Cambridge, you know, in fact, let me ask you, when you think about Cambridge, what type of person do you think about?
I mean, like I said, I had to bite my tongue earlier when I mentioned about, you know, certain grammar school people, which certain leaders came from. So I assume the same thing. People who go there are people who are with parents with sharp elbows, let's just say, and they have a certain they have a certain kind of thinking of life. Again, but at the end of the day, whether I like to admit or not, Oxford and Cambridge are still, you know, high up there. And if I had opportunity, it would be, you know. So yeah, so like you said, it's, even though it was your father's prompting you, that's successful. So to answer your question, I just think it's upper middle class people who want to study things that they might not end up using in their life. Again, I'm kind of generalizing here, but yes, go ahead.
Yeah. So that's kind of the perception I had. So it's typically upper middle class, overwhelmingly white, and that was something that put me off. I didn't think necessarily that it's somewhere I could fit in. I didn't think the culture was something that I could adjust to that well. And these were perceptions I had without even, you know, visiting the uni. Like, I'd never been on the campus. I never really. It was purely from assumptions. So that, in one aspect, was something that put me off applying. And secondly, I wasn't sure whether or not I'd even, you know, get the grades or, you know, the requirements to get into Cambridge. And now that I look back, it's kind of silly to think that, because again, there was nothing to suggest that academically I wouldn't be able to get in, because, you know, I'd flourished academically all through school.
Nice.
I was, you know, kind of top 5 within my year group consistently every year. So there was nothing to suggest that I couldn't get in. But for whatever reason, I initially self-selected out of the process. And then, you know, as my dad had said, you know, you might as well just throw your hat in the ring, try, you know, give it a try. So I did. And, you know, I remember being in an economics lesson and I got a text from my dad. In fact, initially I got a text from my cousin who said, "Oh, it looks like you're going Cambridge." And I'm like, huh? I was confused. Like, what are you talking about? And then I think my brother then called me, and then my dad called me, and he's like, "Yeah, you got in, but your grade requirements are a bit crazy." So they required me to get 2 A stars and an A.
Damn.
So yeah, it was a conditional offer, and they required quite a lot of me. I think typically they ask for 1 A star and 2 A's, and I think they usually don't specify which subjects you need to get in. But for me, they specified I need an A star in maths and chemistry. No, I think that I needed an A star in maths and economics. In my A levels.
2 difficult subjects, and you need to smash
2 difficult subjects. Exactly. So I was a bit like, okay, this. Let me not get my hopes up, because this is a bit of a ask. And I don't know. I mean, obviously, I went through the process of. So initially, when I applied, you do a personal statement. Cambridge's and Oxford, I'm assuming as well, and medicine in general, is interesting in that you have to there's typically extra hoops you have to jump through. So for me, I had to write an essay, a kind of a university level essay on inflation over the last 100 years or something like that. And A-level economics is so different to economics at university level. So I had to do loads of research. It gave me loads of like a reading list of things to cover. And I sent in this essay, then I had to do the interview, I had to do a numeracy test, and then eventually got the offer. And then after receiving an offer, it was all about getting the grades. And luckily, or I should say thankfully, I managed to get the grades for both subjects. I remember going into my school, my brother dropped me off in his car, and he waited in the car as I went to just grab the results. And I went back into the car to read them. And there was loads of my friends outside just kind of like waiting to hear what I had to say. And I read it, I was like, it was nerve-wracking, man. I was like, oh, like all the way from my house to the school, like my heart was, I had palpitations. Because do you know what's funny? Yeah, sometimes, well, what they do is they give you're able to check your UCAS application online, and they hadn't released it for Cambridge, so I literally had to go into school to find out for the first time. So yeah, I'm in the car, I open up the letter, and I see that I got the grades, and then I stuck my hand out the window, and then like loads of my friends were just going mad, just jumping around. And so yeah, we were just gassed, and I was happy, but at the same time a little bit nervous. So yeah, it was a wild experience.
Hey, look, I'm sweating over here, reliving it right now, because the kind of hoops you had to jump through just to actually. And it's I'm not going to be a cynic or conspiracy theory, but they were specific on what they wanted. But the fact that you smashed every obstacle that was in your way, so it's honestly, I'm saying this again, hats off, respect to you, Kwaku, for doing that.
No, thank you, man. Thank you.
It's and also at the same time, like you said, you've done the grammar school. You give props to your dad. You went for Cambridge again. Props. I mean, Mr. Dapper here is smashing it when it comes to his achievements here as well. So
I tried, man. I tried. There was, yeah. Funnily enough, though, is weird. Like when people ask me, "Oh, I heard you went Cambridge, or what university did you go to?"
Yeah.
For some reason, I'm still reluctant to really.
Okay, look, I'm gonna tell you right now, you need to drop it like it's hot, okay? In the sense of like, because I was laughing at something on Twitter where, I mean, it's true, there are some people who kind of like to remind you they went to a certain university, and luckily in the UK we're not as bad as the US, where you actually are kind of classified, but from where you went, but still, as a young black male from London, attending two types of education which is normally not accessible, and you still came out smelling like a bunch of roses, mate. I think sometimes, and it's funny you say that, because I've met some people who don't like to drop their name if they have a PhD.
That's interesting.
So in effect, we do live in a very kind of artificial materialistic world where sometimes you need to drop that hint. Hey, I've come and I've survived from the trenches of Cambridge, for people to give you the respect.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, and I feel like definitely when it's mentioned, there's a certain level of respect that comes with it, where people listen a bit more attentively to your opinions.
Oh yeah.
Then say I didn't go to Cambridge, and I mean there's usually a lot of surprised voices.
Because
and similarly, even whilst on campus, like literally whilst at university, I can like, so just for context for people that don't really know how Cambridge and Oxford works. So it's based on a collegiate system in which there's loads of different colleges that make up the university, and all of these colleges have a certain level of autonomy. So there's a central there's somewhat of a central body, but there's 30 different colleges have their own cultures, have their own endowments and everything. So when I went to a college called Peterhouse, which ended up being the most conservative and the smallest college in Cambridge. And that was wild because I put in an open application. Some people specified, I want to go to this college, I want to go to this college. I knew nothing. I thought, what do you mean? Like, these are all the same. Cambridge is Cambridge. Little did I know that, there is quite a lot of difference in the cultures of different colleges and the people that tend to go to them. So, for instance, as King's, there's a college called King's, which typically is politically left-leaning. There's quite a lot of people from London that go there, and that has its own vibe. And then there's somewhere like Trinity, for instance, which is, is a very, very wealthy college. They own land throughout Cambridge. They own, I believe, more land than the Queen, I believe.
My gosh.
Or something along those lines. I can't remember exactly. But very, very wealthy college. And that tends to be people from a different kind of social strata. So like, is when I would go to certain colleges, people would say, "Oh, are you visiting a friend here?" Or, "Oh, do you go to?" People might ask me if I go. So in Cambridge, there's two main universities. There's Cambridge, and then there's Anglia Ruskin. So people might say, "Oh, go to Anglia Ruskin," and you get experiences like that. One time, I went to a college because you have these things called supervisions, which are like equivalent to seminars, but tend to be smaller groups. And I went to a supervision at a particular college, and I was trying to go through, and people, you get ideas as a student, but people don't typically have to put out the ID. You kind of go in between colleges without any fuss. But on a few occasions, and in one particular occasion that I have in mind, I went in to go to a supervision as normal. I've done it multiple times in this particular college. I think it might have been for macroeconomics or something like that. And I go through the Porter's Lodge, and the porter essentially stops me and says, "Do you come here?" And I was like, "No, I have a supervision here." And I see loads of white kids just going in, and bearing in mind this is a college where there's like 800 people, so unless the porter is claiming he knows the face of every one of those 800 people, then there's a reason why he's assuming that I do not go to the college. So we had loads of back and forth. Like I was getting really agitated. I was getting quite angry and raising my voice because I'm just seeing like you're taking a mick, because you're essentially stopping me from going to something that I've paid to attend. You're literally stopping me from pursuing what I need to pursue, and based on an assumption that based on how I look, presumably I don't go there. So like I said, there's white kids going in without ID, not being checked, and then me all of a sudden, "Oh, do you have ID?" And I just happened that day to have left my ID at home because I had to use it before. And so maybe after 10-15 minutes, he lets me in, which makes me feel like, okay, why did you? If you really thought that I wasn't from there, or some type of threat or whatever the case was, you know, of letting me in eventually. So he did let me in. There was another person, a master at the college. Masters are people that, how do I describe them? No, sorry, not a master, a fellow. So they have a fellowship at the college. They're doing some research based at the college or whatever. There was a lady there in her robes or whatever, and she essentially was backing up the porters and kind of looking down at me. It was such a weird experience. Like it really angered me. And yeah, man, there was a few occasions like that put a dampening to my Cambridge experience. But I mean, yeah, it's only after I graduated, maybe even 2 years after, where I really sat down and took stock of that whole experience and say, yeah, it was an interesting experience. There was highs and lows, but it was generally quite a tough time in my life, I'd say, but with loads of happy experiences within it as well.
Well, I mean, look, the thing again, and this is why you need to drop where you came from, simply because if you survive the trenches of Cambridge, you survive the society that's kind of, even within the academia world, it's like, you know, the only certain people are respected. you've come from there and you've done. I mean, your degree, was it economics? Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Look, already that, I mean, back in normal school, that thing was boring. Okay, and then you've done a whole degree in Cambridge, and so if you wanted to, you could have just simply graduated, gotten yourself a job as an academic or as a professional, and that's it. You don't need to, but you've decided to go beyond that. But before we mention your achievements after Cambridge, I do kind of like 100% say it's not only you representing a black male within the UK, but also with your Ghanaian heritage, the African as well, and kind of background, you're representing that, hey, the sky is the limit for us. If we wanted to, we can come to an elite society, in regards to academic wise, and still, how would you say, survive. But the question, besides the headaches you had in Cambridge, were there some joys? And one thing I do know, one of the joys is that you just mentioned early on, you actually created a podcast from this. So tell me more about that. And before we go actually to the podcast, were there any good points of Cambridge?
Yeah, no doubt. Like, I think there's no experience where it's all bad. Like, there was definitely a lot of good experiences I had. The friends that I made. A few of who I'm still good friends with now. Even like going to the club, like there wasn't too, nightlife wasn't the greatest, but you make use of what's there, and I had fun doing that. Even the academic side of things, as much as it was challenging, it's great to be able to have a supervision with someone that is quite prominent in their field.
Nice.
And be with 1 to 2 other people and have access to someone for an hour of that caliber, and is a very, very personalized education, and very very privileged in that sense compared to a lot of other universities, but also like very intense. So there's a lot of cool things that happen with that. I think personally, and this is something that I regret a little bit, is I didn't take full advantage of all of the different things that were available. So, trying things that were very different, whether it be rowing or,
sorry, I apologize.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's something that
no, I'm laughing because my lazy ass would never do that, but go ahead, yeah.
Yeah. And it actually was one of the most, challenging sports to do, because there's so many requirements, waking up at 4-5 a.m, going to the river, like doing all of the training and stuff. So, but I feel like, okay, you could have made a little bit more of an effort. You could have tried a bit more with socializing with people that you won't typically socialize with, etc. But at the same time, you can't regret things happen how they were meant to happen. So so there was loads of good times. And then like you said, something that really came from it, which to today is quite beneficial to my life, is the podcast. So the podcast, as I mentioned, is with 3 of my friends. We all went to Cambridge. We were in different year groups actually, but our paths crossed. So we have my friend Patrick, who was a couple of years above me. Then we had 2 of my friends, Bilal and Tom, who are a year above me, and then there was me. So we were cool during uni, and then after uni we hadn't really talked that much, to be honest. And then randomly one of them messaged me. I can't remember exactly who it was, but they're like, hey, there's been a lot of talk on Twitter about what it's like going to Oxford and Cambridge as a black person, and people have all these different views. And there was so many, like, I mean, I wasn't online when all of these debates were going on, but there was a lot of preconceptions that weren't entirely accurate. So they said, okay, cool, let's have a podcast, or let's at least do an episode where we talk about our experiences and to demystify what it's actually like. So I said, all right, cool, we can do that. So initially it was meant to be 5 of us. There was I don't know if you're aware of who George the Poet is.
And I've heard the name, but school me some more if you don't mind.
Yeah. So George the Poet, he's quite a successful poet and artist, I say, just more broadly, very socially and politically conscious. You find him on, he gets invited for a lot of BBC Question Time, Channel 4
Okay.
News, etc., to talk about a lot of different social issues. And yeah, he was a friend of ours. He was the year above me, and initially it was meant to be with 5 of us, but he couldn't make it. I think he had other priorities. Obviously, he's a busy guy with his career. So so we had this episode. We recorded in a studio in Hackney, and we finished it, and it was like, oh wow, this was a very deep conversation, because this is things we hadn't talked about ever. And it was just like, wow, we had so many similar experiences, and whilst we were there, we weren't really discussing it. And then we actually didn't put out that episode for months.
Serious?
I think we might have recorded it in like August, and we didn't drop it until like February, March the following year. And when we did drop that episode, there was such a good reception from it, and so many people. It started a conversation with a lot of people, and we thought, okay, cool. Like, if so many people got value from our conversation, maybe let's expand the topics and make a thing out of it. So we ended up doing more episodes from a vast array of different subjects. But then I think if I had to pigeonhole us, it will be, we generally discuss topics that are pertaining to the Black British experience from the perspective of Black and mixed race men, from London, and yeah, we kind of did it that way, and we've had loads of highlights in our journey. We had Stormzy as a guest to this. Yeah, that was a big one. So he was this. I don't know if you remember when he announced the Stormzy scholarship, right?
I was just about to ask you after that, but that's spot on. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so he announced the scholarship. He got so much backlash from it. People claiming that he's racist.
Oh my gosh.
That it's discriminatory. That it's not a scholarship that's provided to white students as well.
Oh my gosh.
So much conversation around it, which showed that the wider public didn't really understand the situation in which there are a lot of financial burdens that put people off from applying to university, and particularly when it comes to these types of universities where it's very prestigious, very elitist. And just to be straight up, there's barely any Black people there. Were underrepresented in these types of universities. So his whole thing was, okay, we need to create an incentive for people to apply and not self-select out, but also to make the life of a couple of people that end up going easier. So the whole thing is we provide a scholarship for 2 students a year. They get basically a free rides, grants, etc., to cover all of their basically cover everything for them, like tuition, everything. So on the back of that backlash, you thought, okay, cool. Stormzy was not, he said, I'm not going to do any press, I'm not going to talk to anyone about it. And then one of my friends, so Bilal, actually reached out on Instagram, randomly, just kind of took a shot, and he responded, like, just out of the blue, he responded saying, oh, like, I actually heard of you guys, I was thinking I was actually going to reach out. And I'm like, what?
Wow.
You knew what we were doing already. I was like, what? So he was like, listen, you guys are the perfect platform to talk about this issue, because you're obviously black guys that already went to this university. In the perfect platform. I know you're gonna give me a fair shot of explaining everything. And so we ended up doing that, and that did a lot for us as well, kind of made us a lot more prominent. We ended up winning an award with the British Podcast Awards.
Respect.
So yeah, loads of cool things happen on the back of that, and we're continuing to start putting that episode. We've had times where we've kind of been, a bit, just life gets in the way sometimes. So we've been a bit slow and haven't been releasing episodes as consistently. But yeah, we're getting back on it. We're getting back on it.
Mate, honestly, that's so, like, it's amazing, like the fact that you had Stormzy as a guest, and also, like you mentioned, with the whole how you guys all came together. And it's funny because even now I'm talking to you, asking questions, and I'm definitely gonna search for that first episode, because it will be good to have that perspective of people from a different background going to a university which normally, like you said, upper, and even I believe upper middle class people. But the funny thing is, I remember the backlash for Stormzy, and
Yeah, so it's good. At least, like you said, you've had Stormzy on the show. He was able to tell his side of the story, and people don't realize. And I've met international students who've actually had the whole thing paid by the government. People need bills, to survive whilst they're on university. They need to be able to not stress. And the fact that he provided that platform for a lot of talent out there, it's actually good. And I'm not surprised. That we can discuss a bit later on, how people get all worked up on the situation, which is not really being racist towards other people, but just trying to give other people a legs up, you know.
Exactly.
But from the podcast side, it's amazing. You've kept it, because I'll be honest, from my uni days, I've maybe one or two I've kept in contact, and that's only thanks to Facebook. But you've actually been able to reconnect, and them as well, they being older than you, year ahead. So that's impressive. At least that's a good output from the world of Cambridge. Especially, you provided a platform for people to know about Cambridge. Okay. So I'm going to move on from the world of education, and I really appreciate your insight on that, because you've given me, first of all, a good look into the world of Cambridge Grammar School and why it's needed, especially in today's world. Now, let me talk about your current role. You mentioned at the beginning you work for YSYS, Your Startup, Your Story. Tell me about your role and the organization itself, please.
Sure. So I guess to kick off with, YSYS is a startup community, and it's been active for a couple of years now, and it does a whole host of different things. But the way that we operate now is we run various programs. One being Founders Door, which supports entrepreneurs, and then one's being Talent Door, which supports talent from diverse backgrounds into getting careers in tech. So those are the two kind of core missions we have. But then alongside that, we also provide diversity and inclusion training for different organizations. And we also help different organizations to launch and run campaigns. So yeah, there's kind of a four-pronged approach in what we do. And I run the founder support side of things. So
nice.
I joined YSYS last year, and my main role was actually to manage a program, which we gave the name Founders Door, which is a pre-accelerator program. It supports young entrepreneurial talent from diverse backgrounds, basically to launch startups. So take them from a stage where they have an idea and get them to a stage where they have validated that idea and are in a good position to then essentially move on and either get funding or to develop an MVP and kind of take the next steps into creating a startup. And the reason why that's important is because we have people that come up with ideas every day, but they don't know the way to really get things going. And the reason why we took on that validation piece was because one of the key things that kill businesses is people not actually going through the process of testing whether or not whatever they're creating has demand. So whether there's product market fit. And that comes about through things like customer discovery, customer development, really going through the process of working out, is this something, firstly, is this a problem that what is the problem I'm trying to solve? And is the solution that I'm proposing something that can actually solve that problem? So our whole thing is, okay, we'll take you through that process in a very structured way, and then offer post-program support, which allows you to tap into different networks, introductions to investors and various things from within the community, which allows you to move forward with your mission. And YSYS is interesting in that it actually started as a WhatsApp group. So my founder and CEO, Deborah O'Connell, she started YSYS as a WhatsApp group, and people were essentially just in the group to share opportunities, to network. She had certain experiences within her career within the startup space, which she went through discrimination as a woman, and particularly as a Black woman, and she wanted to create a space in which people from diverse backgrounds can get together and essentially have a safe space to support each other. And over time, just due to the demand, the WhatsApp group was, full. Like I think I had like 100 people or so, and they decided to move to Slack to develop that further.
Yeah.
And over time, it got to a stage where you started bidding for different projects and receiving funding and actually registered as a proper business. And I happened to be one of the, not the first employee, but one of the first employees. And since then I've just been working on that particular program, and now I'm thinking about what other things we can run, because that particular project was actually funded by the London Mayor. So
wow,
they have this initiative called a Digital Talent Program, which is saying, okay, how can we get more people to have the required digital skills to make them competitive in this, growing economy in which the digital space is super important, tech is super important. How do we give people the skills to do that? And one of the areas is around supporting people from Black and ethnic minority backgrounds, women, young people, to essentially create startups and to gather those skills and implement them to creating companies which will be the future of the country. So we've ran 3 cohorts now. We've recently, we're due to start our 4th one, and the first 2 we did in person, but the 3rd one is the first time that we've actually ran it completely virtually, which of course was one of the reasons why was because of the pandemic, and obviously not being able to do things in person. But then I had a ulterior motive, which is I kind of foresaw that in order to scale up the impact, particularly post program, after the funding stops from the London Mayor's office, because eventually it was going to stop. It was a somewhat of a short-term project. We need to be able to provide something online which gives it access to a lot more people. So that went well, and we're going to continue that for the 4th one, which is the last one, and then see how we can build that up as a YSYS, a staple part of YSYS delivery and our public offering. That's how it runs.
So let me continue on that point. If you've now been able to go virtual for your current cohort, would you envision yourself, because I'm assuming most of the people you're dealing with are all London based, so do you see yourself going with now you're able to go virtual, national or international even?
I mean, there's no reason why we can't expand the reach to other people within the UK, because like you said, it's virtual. Everyone, or at least people that have access to the internet and to computers, can take advantage of the information that's there. And we have domain experts covering topics, doing video lectures, giving a lot of gems around how to do customer discovery, how to build a prototype for cheap. And a lot of what we do is how can you do things with the lowest cost possible.
Correct.
Because you don't want to invest loads of capital and then all of a sudden things don't go right. You want to spend as little as possible, test as quickly as possible, and then make the right moves off the basis of that. So there's no reason why we can't open it up for people from other parts of the UK who potentially might even need it a little bit more, because there's a lot of regions of the UK where they're underfunded. There's not as many opportunities within entrepreneurship for them. So it'll be good to be able to offer that impact there as well. But then also for older demographics, 18 to 24-year-olds is great, but there's people from slightly older who could also benefit from that information. So very, very open to expanding the cohort and the people that we offer support to.
No, I know, because I mean, living in Manchester, doing certain projects in Leeds, and having friends and families in Birmingham, there is a lot of kind of diverse talent out there. But London is always always at the forefront for certain things. So it's good that if you guys did go virtual, you would have access. But it's interesting why I mentioned Leeds is because Leeds is trying to be the digital capital of the Northwest. So hence the reason why, and from the kind of stuff that you guys are doing, it could easily, go to that level. But the question I have now, you mentioned about the whole lowest cost is, for me, I'm always of the opinion, bootstrap yourself into you kind of blow up in the sense of, successful money wise, whereas other people are quick just to get money thrown at them. And I'm talking about silly money here in the world of Silicon Valley. Companies which have not yet even launched a product or a service are getting billions of valuation. So what's your opinion? And I know, I want Quaker opinion, not from the whole YS side of us, but what do you think?
Yeah, I think I'm in a similar vein to you in that, I feel like it's definitely worth bootstrapping initially to, at least from the validation piece to bootstrap that whole process. And then, I personally believe that you want to get traction and customers that are willing to pay before you even look for investment.
Correct.
A lot of people, they have an idea, a concept, they manage to pitch it to a VC, and then, they have venture capital money, so they just end up spending quite recklessly.
Correct.
Trying to get an office in Shoreditch and, do the various things that are the stamp of a London-based startup. And, a lot of them don't end up lasting that long. There's obviously the few that do really well. There's that and they are able to sell their businesses a really good amount or become unicorns, but that's not the typical experience. So I think bootstrapping initially is a good way about it, and then gather your first few customers, get the traction, and then that gives you a stronger story to tell investors, and puts you in a stronger position to actually get funding. So yeah, that's my take on things, and that's something that I think even with my company Dapper Chocolates, that's something that we've been doing for the last maybe couple of years. We've been bootstrapping, and I think we're going to start thinking about investment a little bit more, just because I think we validate enough that people want to buy our product at the price point that we've had loads of good sales. I think the current situation off the back of the whole, I guess I don't want to call it the Black Lives Matter movement, because that's a particular organization, and this is much more than an organization. But everything off the back of that has led to a lot more attention being given to Black businesses and Black initiatives, and we've been able to in some ways benefit from it as far as sales go. But there's a lot more things that we can do, and a lot more scalability that we need to reach in order to really become a profitable, self-sustaining business. So that's something we're working towards now.
Oh no, it's perfect. You've actually jumped on it, because that was actually my next question. So tell me about Dapper Chocolates. Because I had some questions about it, especially like you mentioned with the whole Black Lives Matter movement. I know, but you're right about one thing. It has raised the conscience of that we need to support, and a lot more businesses who, if they were given the same support. But before we go to that, so tell me, what is Dapper Chocolates?
Sure. So Dapper Chocolates, we are a family-owned business that produce bean-to-bar chocolates, sourcing cocoa from Ghana. We have a direct relationship with a farming cooperative in the eastern region of Ghana. And the reason why we decided to actually start Dapper Chocolates was because essentially we realized that, and this is something that's, I guess, quite well known within the industry, but the main cocoa growers in the world are in Ghana and Ivory Coast. I think together we produce about, I want to say 80% all of the cocoa globally. And despite that fact, the majority of the growers and farmers only see about 2% of that value, essentially. So let me give that into context.
Wow.
So the chocolate industry is worth about $100 billion.
Okay.
And the cocoa growing industry, which is obviously the primary ingredient in chocolate, the growers only see about 2% of the value of the whole chocolate industry. So very much in the primary stage of production. And it's something that's typical throughout a lot of Africa, where, most of the raw kind of materials, whether it's, bauxite and timber, or whether it's gold or
Yeah.
cocoa or any of these various crops, we have it in abundance, but then we don't tend to produce anything from them. We just tend to sell it
Mm-hmm.
and export it directly to other countries. And we thought, okay, cool. What we need to do in our own small way is to give an example of how we can create a value add business where, okay, cool, we have the raw materials, but let's actually create something from it so that we can see a higher percentage of that value.
Nice.
So that was the whole incentive behind it. And I guess more on a social kind of personal level, being from Ghana and cocoa being our main cash crop, my family on both sides were involved in the cocoa growing business in in some capacity. A lot of people are cocoa growers and live at a subsistence level, but my mum's family, grandma, granddads, great granddad, great grandma, and then on my dad's side, similarly, great grandma had cocoa farms, and is somewhat a continuation of that legacy, of that heritage. And we, again, with Dapper Chocolates, we've had a lot of, I think, early success, not in any crazy way, but we definitely have gained some good traction. We've won an award with the Young British Foodies in 2019, which was a very good look for us. So yeah, again, like, this is something that we need to push more into, even just on a level of black businesses. And when we tell people that we have a business that produces chocolate, like, people just kind of look like, wow, like, two black guys from South London with a chocolate business. That's like, when do you ever hear something like that? So we like the fact that we managed to I guess change the perception of who can be involved in those type of businesses, and to beat stereotypes and that kind of thing. That's not what we planned to do. That wasn't our mission, but it's a nice kind of like side thing that it means that hopefully other young black people in the UK feel like, okay, cool, I don't need to pigeonhole myself. I don't have to think my only way out is to become a musician.
I was gonna say, spot on,
I mean, or footballer, or even like necessarily have to go the corporate route and become a lawyer or accountant. Those are obviously great professions, but there's other things you can do, and that's another thing that we really see value in from starting Dapper Chocolates.
So based on that, now my question to you is that, at first when you mentioned Dapper Chocolates, with my limited knowledge, and I hadn't done much research, I assumed, you just simply supply the cocoa. But the fact is, you actually make the chocolate, you sell the chocolate, because even that, I know, like, if you look at within Europe, so France or Switzerland, some people just specialize in just selling that. They don't get involved from the kind of like, from source to supply, the kind of element. They don't, they just simply, they just buy the stuff, then they make their own chocolate, and then they sell the art. So you guys also create the chocolate? You design the name? Do you are they selling? Are you guys purely online, or have you sold to stores? Tell me about that supply chain part.
Sure. So essentially we take part. We're involved in the whole process from the raw beans themselves right until the stage where it's a finished bar of chocolate. So we source the cocoa. We go through the process of grinding the beans, removing the shell, roasting the cocoa, making the chocolate. We sourced all the various ingredients. A lot of them actually we source from the continent, the African continent, which is great, and it just feeds into our brand as I think we want to see ourselves as an African brand more so than a Ghanaian brand necessarily. So all that process we learned through watching videos on YouTube, from reading blogs. Like, we really just went into the trenches of the online world, because it is quite a niche thing. There's a few companies that make artisanal chocolates, but is a very small industry. So we had to really just do our digging and do our research, and just loads of trial and error. And luckily we were quite lucky in that we found a recipe that worked well very quickly, and we managed to get to a stage where we were able to make decent chocolate quite early, but then obviously there's so many things that can go wrong with making chocolate, particularly when it comes to things like tempering, and it's a very intricate process. And we've had loads of ups and downs with that, but now we're at a stage we can pretty much consistently make good batches. So yeah, at the moment we're selling purely online through our website, dapperchocolates.com or dapperchocolates.co.uk. We own both domains, and we are hoping to stock in a few places over time, but I think again our whole thing is capacity, because we are a very small operation, and once we're able to scale up our production capacity, then we'll be able to then stock in more places.
So coming on to that point now, mentioning about scaling up, you touched upon the fact that with the whole Black Lives, supporting Black businesses, how would you like to scale up? Because you've achieved what a lot of people would have not been able to achieve. You've created your MVP, you've identified your niche, you've identified your product, and you have customers who are willing to buy at the price point you guys have set. So if a VC came in or an investment, how would you go about in scaling up?
Yeah, good question, and it's something that we always, me and my brother, we go back and forth quite a lot about the direction. And we recently started thinking, like I said, a lot more about investment and how we go about, securing it. So I don't necessarily think VCs would be interested, only because it's not the type of business where you want to like 5x or 10x your investment.
Okay.
It's not like a tech company, for instance, that there's the marginal costs are like zero, and you can essentially just produce as much as you want and sell as much as you want. And
I forget I'm talking to economists here. That's good, man. You're spot on. Sorry, go ahead.
and create like a valuation, and get an IPO, and then just the people that invested early can then start selling their shares and what have you. We're not. I don't think we're the type of the company that would do that. So I think our best bet is either to raise funding through like crowdsourcing, providing equity to the investors, or to get private investment from an angel investor, or from a family and friends around, or something like that. And it's cool. We've managed just through networking to find a lot of different people that are willing to help us in that mission. So I think our next stage, really, like as I mentioned, was to increase our supply capacity, and that could be done through finding a facility that we can use and to rent that space out, to buy new equipment.
Nice.
And I think this is a cool strategy. I was actually chatting to one of my friends about it. I think even yesterday, and he was saying, if to validate that you want to scale up, to validate the demand and the need for you to scale up, first what you can do is to approach different stockists and get a purchase agreement. So essentially to say, okay, cool, are you able, like, for the company, or the whether it's a coffee shop, whether it's a a large chain, or Selfridges, or whatever it is, for them to say, okay, cool, we would be willing to buy 1,000 bars. That is enough for us to say, okay, cool. If you can give us the money up front, that's wicked, because then we can use that money to buy the equipment and just start producing. Or we can at least say, okay, cool, if we have a customer that's already said, yes, we have the intention of buying your stock, then we can just invest our capital and just start that, and just be able to fulfill that order, and then we can we can move that way. So there's a lot of conversations being had around that, and
nice.
Hopefully we can move that way.
No, well, I mean, I'm telling you up front now, if you guys start scaling up, and I got the Somaliland market on lockdown, I'll be your only supplier. I'll tell you right now. So
love that.
No, because the thing is, I love the fact it's an African product run by and professionals with African heritage. But at the same time, I honestly believe with chocolate being a staple part of a lot of people, once we remove ourselves from this, I mean, still you have people who will want to enjoy the luxuries of life because billionaires and millionaires have gotten richer in this climate. Yeah. So the fact is, and it's still a product that people enjoy to cheer up or to, how would you say, have fun. So as a result, when it scales up and you're able to start as well have a supply chain for Somaliland, I'm your man right there. All right.
No, I
So
appreciate it. I'll definitely reach out. And actually, just one more thing, because I think there's a dynamic of the company that I didn't mention, but we actually produce completely dairy-free chocolate. So
oh my gosh, how
yeah,
can
we
see?
don't use any dairy.
You know what? It's I mean, in this day and age where that's already a kind of a showstopper. That's such an important thing. That's impressive. So you don't use no dairy in the chocolate then?
Yeah, no dairy at all. We have various milk alternatives. Essentially, what we do is use coconut milk.
Nice.
Which and again, it harks back to our African heritage because coconuts grow indigenously in Africa. So it gives a really nice texture and a really nice taste, and is still people think of coconut being quite overpowering, but
Yes.
when it comes to our dark chocolate and our I say milk chocolate in inverted commas because obviously it's not real milk.
Yeah. Yeah.
The cocoa is strong enough where it's not overwhelmed by the coconut, but the
That's
white
cool.
chocolate still has the nice coconut taste, which a lot of people actually quite like. So
No.
that's one of our secrets, public secrets, I should say, which makes us the vegan market. We've got a
Yes.
lot of love from the vegan market initially, and that's obviously a growing trend in that. I forgot the stats, but there's going to be, over time, a lot more people are going to be going vegan for various reasons, whether it's ethical, whether it's
Correct.
because of climate change, and so it's a good space to be in.
No, I mean, one of my earlier guests. His market was designed for people who it was not to have silk, so people who as well, who within the vegan market as well. So as I think that's a big thing. But one thing you've told me now, because I do like my dark chocolate, and the fact you don't use dairy milk, I have to try it out. So after this, I'll make sure I'll reach out to the website and order myself a few bars, definitely. So
Yeah.
no, honestly, it's like, because like you said, because I can handle coconut, but if the cocoa is still and how would you say, still out there and it's not coconut, then I would definitely need to try it out, especially if I'm going to be the sole supplier to Somaliland. Anyway, yeah. I might as well try out what I'm selling. Okay, look, the thing is, Quaker, you're very humble because look, I like you went to grammar school. You don't mention that much. You went to Cambridge. You've launched a successful podcast. You've actually won an award, and you've won an award as well for Dapper Chocolate. And also, I forgot to mention earlier when I was doing my research on you to prepare for this podcast, and even where you're currently working at, you guys are in the middle of a competition, so you could potentially win another award. Tell me about that. What's that one?
Sure. So yeah, do you know what? I think what initially happened is we came across the awards,
Yeah.
and somebody had nominated us, and I kind of like, okay, cool, we applied, and then I just left it at that. I didn't really like think about it again, and I actually forgot about it completely until I received the email saying that we'd been shortlisted. And again, I thought, okay, cool, that's nice, and then I just left it again. And then later on, they emailed saying, okay, yeah, you've been chosen, you've been shortlisted again into the final 10.
Wow.
For our particular category. So this is it's called the Digital Leaders 100 Awards.
Yeah.
It's basically for 100 individuals, organizations that are doing important work within the digital space, whether it be digital skills training, whether it be being an influential person, excuse me, in the digital space, in the tech space. And yeah, we were nominated in particular for the program that I manage, which obviously is a nice piece of validation for me as well, that I did something cool with it. And yeah, so we're in the final 10. There's going to is now open to the public vote.
Mhm.
And the public are then gonna, through the public vote, the top 3 for the category is going to be chosen, and then there's going to be the award ceremony, and we'll find out who the overall winner is. But yeah, that's obviously something that we are really proud of. And yeah, so the actual category is the digital skills and inclusion training. So yeah, it fits in perfectly with what we do and what our aim was. So, you know, a lot of our competitors are from kind of like local authorities and you know, things like that. So as a private entity, is nice that we'll be able to fit in that. And you know, we created so much value from, you know, it's not a huge budget, I won't lie to you, the budget's not huge, but we managed to make it work. So
Well, so when's the competition ending, and when's the deadline for people to stop voting? Was it this week, next week?
so it's in August. I can't remember the specific
good, we got
date,
time.
so you've got to forgive me, but yeah,
Nah.
we have it in like August.
Don't worry. The only reason why I was asking is just to make sure, because once I launch this podcast, I will put that link there. So for my listeners to also make sure, you are a very modest guy, my friend. You've been winning awards left to right, but you don't shout it from the rooftop, which you should do, to be honest. You know. So
Yeah.
I think definitely it's the case. But okay. I'm gonna jump to a different topic altogether. I just had to clarify that, because then you're very laid back for regards to the fact you've been very successful, and a lot of people with just one of the projects you've actually managed would have been shouting about that from day one. Okay, so when it comes to Dapper Chocolate, that I am very interested in, especially from an African perspective, as well as from the fact that it's actually something that, if you were to scale that up, I believe you might just dedicate that full time, because running a successful business, I mean, saying that though, I've seen how you're able to cook different pots with all your how would I say, projects. But let me stay on the topic of Africa. Okay, now, you know, if I get a Ghanaian guest on my show, I got to ask about our boy Kwame Nkrumah. Please let me know if I said the name correctly.
Oh, perfect.
Sweet. Well, okay, this guy was the first prime minister, as you know, president of Ghana. Now, the thing why I'm mentioning him, like you, the guy was educated in the UK, and he went back to Ghana, became a leader and a legend. Okay, not only for Ghana, but a lot of people do talk about him for Africa, very Pan-Africanism. And at the same time, I don't want to put too much pressure on you, but you are already smashing it with a lot of achievement. Do I see you following the same footstep as his visionary?
Ooh, like you said, there's a big boots to fill. So I think for me, for one, I probably wouldn't go the political route, like the politics route. I think quite jaded when it comes to mainstream politics, just because, you know, I've seen just how much, just how I don't want to say corrupt, but just how politicians tend to just try to increase the fortune of a small subset of, you know, society.
Correct.
And there's so many loopholes and so many things that lay in the way of any tangible change for the types of communities that I am invested in. So, you know, there's things that can be done, but I'm also like, I don't know if I can take, firstly, the intrusion in my personal life, but then also just the various hoops that need to be jumped through in that regard. So I do though have a desire to have some type of footprint in Africa, and I think Ghana primarily, but then also I'm very open to opportunities in other countries in the continent, because ultimately I feel, you know, our power is in numbers, and the more countries in Africa that are on the same wave and just like, you know, just more working more closely together, the more bargaining power we have when it comes to other communities, like, you know, in Europe or America, etc. We have a stronger bargaining power. So yeah, I'm open to opportunities, but probably more so in the space of entrepreneurship.
Okay.
And that's probably the space I'd be in. I wouldn't necessarily go there to work and get a job. I think business is probably where I'd like to give it a go. And there's loads of challenges that come with that. My parents actually moved back to Ghana, about 2-3 years ago,
Okay.
and they relocated back after being in the UK for 30 plus years,
Mm.
and even them being native Ghanaians born and raised there, they still have challenges going back and starting business and doing certain things because the system there is very different. The way
Right.
things are done are different. Oftentimes you have to someone needs to get paid to for the ball to roll,
Yes,
unfortunately.
yeah.
Yeah, that can be quite a headache. And the speed at which things get done is a very relaxed, very kind of like, it's not as fast paced as London, which I'm used to things being done
Yeah.
a bit more quickly.
Correct.
So yeah, it's just kind of overcoming those barriers for one. Language barrier. Unfortunately, I can't speak my language fluently.
Okay.
So that in itself is a bit of a barrier. But it is something that I think about and would likely pursue. Probably when I have a bit more. I've done a bit more here, and
Okay.
maybe a bit more financially comfortable, and then I
Right.
can go there and with enough capital to actually to do more.
No, 100% agree with you because, like you, I'm not a big fan of politics. Like you said, it just changes you inside out, and as a result, that's why I had to bite my tongue earlier. If I had got involved in politics here in the UK, let alone in Africa, yeah. And so, yes, for me, I think if I ever went back to Somaliland, it would be only on the business perspective rather than politics. So, 100%, 100% with you. And I like how you've highlighted that even people who were born and raised there still find it hard to readjust because whether we realize or not, here in the UK, we pick up a few things like queuing, a little thing like that.
Yeah, there's definitely some cultural norms that aren't the same. You get me? So
For real,
you have
for
to
real.
adapt.
But look, I'm gonna go a bit lighter now. I've been dropping you with some heavy topics. Okay, so I know you got some cooking skills because I'm assuming you do because you guys, young generation nowadays, are a bit more switched on than your boy here. Yeah, but definitely better than me. So if I was to say, what type of food would you be, and especially with the whole Dapper chocolate, what would you be? What would you identify yourself as a food?
As a food, I've heard like which animal or which like I've heard those types of questions, but I've never actually heard like a food based identity. But ooh, if I had to be a food, and do you mean in the sense of like my favorite food, or just mean as far as like characteristics of a food that I
Characteristic,
align with?
yes, and it's the favorite food is the easy one. I had to make it more challenging. So if you were a food, what food would you be?
Cool. All right. So I think I'd be ooh. Oh man. I'll say I'll say maybe plantain.
Ah, okay.
And I'll give my reasoning behind that. So firstly, plantain is one of those foods where it's very versatile.
Uh-huh.
You can have it in so many different ways. It's eaten by so many different cultures,
Yeah.
and you can have it at different stages of its development. So whether it's ripe or whether it's less ripe, there's a way you can cook it in, which is nice. And I think I'd align myself to that in the sense that I am.
Nice.
And also in is a staple in so many different cultures as well. So yeah, I think I'm aligned in a sense that I feel generally I am malleable in that
Nice.
I think I can get on with loads of different people from loads of different backgrounds and cultures. For one, I'm interested in those in different cultures and learning about them. I'd say I can be sweet, but typically I think typically I'm sweet, but then also I have my times when I'm not that sweet. I'm a bit more stoic in nature. And then Yeah, let me stick to those two. Like I'll
Mate,
probably do.
I love it, mate, because it's honestly it does sum you up. From the little that I've spoken to you, you're right. You're right. It's that's a good food choice. Alright, and now here's an interesting one. It's still on the topic of food. Okay,
Mm,
so now I want you to settle this age-old question between two giant African country rivals. Alright,
mm,
which is
mm.
better, Ghanaian or Nigerian jollof rice?
Uh, you know, naturally I'm biased, but at the same time, I honestly feel like it's an objective truth that Ghanaian jollof rice is better.
Ah.
And one reason why I'd say that is because the way we cook it and the way they cook it is different. So for
Yeah.
one,
Yeah.
I think the main difference is that we use basmati rice and
Ah.
they tend to use long grain rice, right? And long grain rice, if you see it, is it's a different size and texture and
Yeah.
taste. It's small, is like a thick, short grain,
Mm-hmm.
and for that reason, it doesn't tend, in my opinion, to soak up the flavors as much as a basmati rice does.
Right. Right.
And also Ghanaians tend to cook
Yeah.
the jollof rice longer and like a low heat, but for longer periods of time. Whereas I think Nigerians tend to cook it a lot quicker. So it just is not as flavorful for me
Yeah.
personally.
Yeah.
And yeah, man, Ghanaian jollof rice is 100% better. If I had to rank it,
Yeah.
and you know, like jollof rice is more than just Ghana and Nigeria. I think because the UK is obviously Ghanaians and Nigerians are more predominant as far as like loud,
Correct.
not loud, but like you know,
I know
probably
what you
more
mean.
populous
Yeah.
in like the UK.
Yeah.
But you know, jollof rice is actually a Senegambian food. You know, jollof
No
from
way.
Wolof, and there's the Wolof people. Yeah. So I have a friend who's Gambian, and
Yeah.
you know, she's a great cook as well. She's a chef, and I've had the Gambian jollof, and it's nice. Like I rate
Oh
it a lot.
wow.
I heard Sierra Leonean jollof rice is really good. I've never tried it, but I've heard good stuff about it. So yeah, I'll say probably top three will probably be those three. And
Okay.
that's biased because I haven't tried one of them, but I'm sure that is better than Nigerian jollof rice. I'm so sure of it.
well, well, that's good to know. So all my Niger people out there, the truth is out. Ghanaian is better, and the fact Gambia, because it's funny. I went to Gambia years ago, and I did enjoy the rice. I didn't realize this is how clueless your boy is, that was actually jollof rice. But the fact Ghanaian use basmati, that's already a big plus for me. Yeah, we
Yeah,
Somalis, we love
I
our
know
rice.
Somalis. Yeah, I know you use your for your
Oof.
barisi, you use
Oh,
a lot of
oh,
basmati as
that's
well.
right, man. You know the flex. I like that, Kweku. It's how would they say, something that for us rice lovers out there, and we do appreciate it. But no, and that's good to know. Okay, sweet. Now going from light to a bit heavy. Okay, I've enjoyed this podcast. You're very calm. You don't like shout about your achievements. So I want to ask you this sensitive topic about mental health. Yeah. You're
Mm,
the guy, you're cooking many pots of rice. Yeah, I had to drop the word rice. Yeah, but hey. And how do you keep your sanity in check?
mm. So yeah, it's hard. Mental health is so temperamental.
Mm,
I feel like you know, one day you're fine, another day you can be quite low, and that's influenced by so many different external things to you.
hmm
So, funnily enough, I've actually written quite, I wouldn't say extensively, but I wrote a pamphlet for a publication called Caricom
All right.
magazine, and
Mm-hmm.
I've wrote a, you know, I think it was like a 5,000 word essay um on mental health for Black men.
Yeah.
So I think there's some common experiences that a lot of Black men face for various reasons, particularly in the context of growing up in, you know, a predominantly white society in which
Mm,
you're, you know, a ethnic minority. There's loads of things that come with that I think Black people and Black men in you know the case that I spoke about
yep.
suffer from. And for me, I guess in respect to in respect to like juggling multiple things,
Yeah.
I think it's just being organized, because then it allows you to, at least the mental space that you're in is a bit cleaner.
Yeah.
So you're less likely to just be overwhelmed with things. And not to say that that's not going to happen, but is somewhat easier in when you're well organized. And then alongside that is just certain practices that I try to implement. I'm not perfect at them. I'm not consistent necessarily, but prayer. I'll try to keep up my prayers. I do meditation now and again, just like breathing meditation, breathing exercises. Breathing exercise is actually one that I'd promote quite heavily, because that's something where you can see immediate effects.
Right.
I believe. The breath is something that is so undervalued, and how it can affect your physiology, how it can affect your mood, all of those various things. So that's a big one. I'm quite into biohacking and different ways in which you can influence your state of being and your well-being through activities. So for instance, there's breathing exercises, there's I take cold showers in the morning, which people think I'm crazy for doing, but it really does like put you in a good mental state. Actually, on a physical level, it increases your production of certain hormones that are known for kind of natural painkillers, essentially. And dopamine and all these various chemicals in your body that are good for your well-being. And I think those are the key things.
Nice.
It's not easy, but it's you have to try.
No, I mean, first of all, I'm definitely gonna ask you to send me the link for the article, because I will share it, because it is important. I mean, people have, even though there's a lot of things that we enjoy, the whole element of being grateful for actually being at home, but people have been a bit down when it comes to the being locked down. So sometimes for some people, it's a shock to the system. We are a social animal, but at the same time, if you were doing many things, if one of our things fall apart, how do we actually move ahead? So that's good to know. Like you said, breathing, and even how would you say it? Like, I believe I'm so grateful I'm able to breathe. This is one of the blessings we get from God. So it's like, whether some people are in the machine, like you see with the whole COVID, you're in the hospital and the machine has to keep you alive. So little things like that. So I like your way of thinking, the breathing. Cold showers, I'll be honest, I always assumed that was only for young single men who actually, and before they got married. But funny. I won't go down there. Okay, let me switch from one sensitive topic to another one. Okay, we've touched upon it throughout this podcast, but I want you to give your perspective. You're a successful black male, even though you are being modest about it, but you are living and working in the UK. What advice would you give to the future generation? Because you have to remember, when I was 27, I was nowhere near as juggling as much as you were doing. And it seems as if as we get older, the younger generation are expected to be, startup entrepreneurs at the age of 12 at this rate, So what advice would you give to the future generation?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point you raised about just the expectation to be doing stuff, or at least the perception of doing stuff. And a lot of that is driven by social media and, Instagram and showing the best version of yourself. And, people just really boasting and when you go on social media and see those things, it is very easy to feel like you are underperforming. So one thing I'd say is to acknowledge that you are living at your own pace, and to try not to compare yourself to other people. Try to just acknowledge that you're running your own race. You should move at your own pace. Of course, you should do the best you can in all capacities, all facets of your life. But if you don't see that you're reaching the goals that you have at the stage that you want, then you need to just be patient, and to have the patience and discipline to see yourself through those low points. There's so many success stories where, I think the main thing that is a common theme with people that are so-called successful in their field is just that consistency.
Right.
They go through that stage where no one's listening, no one's paying attention, no one's buying their product, no one's listening to their music, no one's, whatever the case is. And then they just push through and just consistently keep going. And when you do that, you tend to attract situations where it can propel you to reach those goals. So discipline, consistency in whatever you're doing is very key. Working at your own pace, and being patient with it. And then I'd say also, particularly to young Black people, is to not pigeonhole yourself. Don't feel like your route has to be one particular way. There's so many different things you can do that you might not have even thought about, and there's a demand for it. So just like be true to yourself. Try different things initially, and then when you know what you want to do and you have a clearer idea of what your goals are, just double down on it and just really go hard. And just take care of your mental. I mean, so many things I could talk about. Like, just take care of your mental health as well.
Right.
Surround yourself with people that will support you, and you're kind of like can support each other.
Yeah.
And can, whether not just in your business or in your work, or your career, but also just mentally, could just be there for each other, support each other, people that you care for, that care for you. Because that's something that is, we say it because we all have family. Well, most people have family, most people have friends, but we undervalue how key it is to have good relationships with people. And it's not until there's kind of like a hard situation that you go through that you really acknowledge who's there for you. So you need to really value those relationships and cultivate those relationships, because that's probably our key asset in life, I feel. So that's what I'd say.
I know, mate. And honestly, good advice. Like you said, surround yourself, be consistent. It's your own race. I mean, like your own pace. I meant to say, run that race, your own pace. It's something that 100% I agree with you, and it's really, really good advice. Kwaku, honestly, I'm gonna repeat it again. You are a very modest and successful guy. Thanks, honestly, for your time. But before I sign off, is there anything else you'd like to add or mention that I have not yet covered? I know I've really taken a lot of your time, so I do apologize up front for that.
No, I've enjoyed it so much, man. It's nice to talk, and it helps me unpack certain experiences and lets me think out loud about certain things that I might not talk about. Particularly, like you said, I'm quite from what you've probably gathered, I'm quite I can be quite introverted person. I tend to like be in my head quite a lot, so expressing things openly is always great. So as far as like final words, I'd just say probably just a repetition of the advice I just gave. It's like, just keep pushing in whatever you're trying to do. Have a work on things that are bigger than yourself. So actually, I should say that.
Nice.
Because living for yourself is you get to a dead end, like. And for frivolous things, you should really, I think our goals or our aim in life should be to serve.
Yes.
More than anything is to serve. You can earning money is great, and you can earn money through serving. Like if you're creating something that people value, the money will come. So
correct.
Just think about serving more than anything else. You're on the world for a short period of time. Do what you can with your time, and help people, support people to live better lives.
Mate, I love that. It's true, because if you have a goal that's bigger than yourself, eventually the money will come, but you at least have a kind of a better feeling, and of actually you've created a legacy for yourself and for the people after you. So no, 100%, I love that. Kwaku, honestly, once again, thanks a million for today, and please, I'm going to ask for you to share me 1, Dapper Chocolate and website, 2, your YSYS and nomination link, and finally as well that mental health article, because I think these are items my followers as well as people listening actually would enjoy and also benefit from.
Yeah, definitely. I'll send that over to you.
All right. Sweet. Well, I'll leave you in peace for now. Thanks again for this, and thanks again for being a guest on Nomadic Delights. And until the next time, you take care, man. Peace and love.
Thank you, man. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure, mate. All the best.
Well, that's all, folks. Thank you for listening to my podcast, which is simply the reflections of a nomad consultant living life on a day-by-day basis. I just want to conclude by saying I appreciate the love and support you guys are showing me. Until the next time, peace and love.